Welcome to our classical conversations. Homer has been a magical word for generations of common men and of geniuses who have created some of our greatest works of art. They were based on the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the gods of Greece, who were often all too human. We invite you to experience some of these great works, and we hope that they will illuminate your life as they have mine. I know you've come in for your weekly dose, and it's going to be a good one today. We're going to have patricide, matricide, fratricide, incest, and cannibalism. What more could you want for the holidays? Sounds like Palm Beach, right?
Where do you want to go? Walk up out of here fast.
We're going to be talking about Agamemnon, but I wanted to just get to some of the poetry from the Iliad. So I'm just going to start with that, with the beginning of the Iliad. And translating is so difficult. If you listen to different translations of the Iliad, sometimes you think, where am I? Because it's a completely different world from one translation to the other. Alexander Pope is the 18th century, so it's in very formal language and rather different from what we would say. Bards of that period opened their evening sessions by invoking the muse, so that the muse would speak through them. It isn't their voice speaking, so I'm invoking the muse. Wrath, sing, goddess, of the ruinous wrath of Peleus' son Achilles, that inflicted woes without number upon the Achaeans, hurled forth to Hades many strong souls of warriors, and rendered their bodies prey for the dogs, for all birds, and the will of Zeus was accomplished. Sing from when they two first stood in conflict, Atreus' son, lord of men, and godlike Achilles. You remember that Achilles was good, that epithets, which Mireille was just talking about, the interesting epithets for the dog when we get to the Odyssey. She's going to bring in a collection of the descriptions of the dog that Homer used. And the epithets for Achilles were always godlike Achilles, all-killing Agamemnon, Lord of men Agamemnon. We're going to be talking today about Agamemnon. He was the ruling king of Mycenae, which was then the capital of the Peloponnese Peninsula, the Peloponnesus, as they say in Greek. To begin with, I'm going to tell you the stories, and there are many, involved in Agamemnon's background. How many of you saw Electra last year or have ever seen Electra? You have seen stories about Electra, I'm sure. Maybe the Eugene O'Neill, Morning Becomes Electra, which was a modern version. There are many of the Greek plays by Aeschylus, by Euripides, Sophocles, so forth, were written about Agamemnon. And you will, when you see the Strauss Electra, you feel sorry for Agamemnon. I mean, Agamemnon, everyone wants to kill him, and in fact they do, and you have no idea why. Well, you have a vague idea, but Clytemnestra comes off as a villain, and you have more sympathy for Agamemnon, who's murdered in his bath. But once you get to know the story, I don't think you'll be quite so sympathetic with this man. We're going to start off with the top of the list, the genealogy. You have of the house, the doomed house, or the accursed house of Atreus, and we're going to talk about what the curses were. I'm sure that you've often wondered what the root of the word tantalize is. Don't you think about that every day? Where did that come from, that word? There was a giant of a man, a ruler, whose name was Tantalus. Tantalus was one of the many gods, and he thought it a fine idea to see if they had really discerning taste. He invited them to dinner, and he cooked up Pelops. P-E-L-O-P-S, into a nice meat pie, perhaps with a few fava beans and a nice Chianti.
With some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
And he served him up to the gods. All of the gods, with the exception of Demeter, realized what it was, and they refused to eat human flesh. But Demeter, unfortunately, chewed into a shoulder and enjoyed it until she found out what it was. And then she ran from the room in horror, managed to revive and reconstruct Pelops, except for his shoulder, which of course she had eaten. So she constructed a silver shoulder for Pelops. You will see sometimes in paintings and in pictures Pelops with a silver shoulder. How many of you have, I've asked this before, read Harry Potter? If you will remember, and she took so much of what she wrote from these Greek myths, that the villain was given a silver hand by Voldemort when they chopped off his hand, and he gave him a silver hand. So they gave Pelops a silver shoulder. Remember that. Obviously, this was a curse, the beginning of a curse on the house of Atreus. However, Tantalus was punished by Zeus. He couldn't kill him because the gods are immortal. So he was punished by Zeus by putting him in a pool of fresh water with fruit, grapes, it's usually shown, some delicious fruit hanging above him, but he couldn't reach the fruit, was always just out of his reach. So he was always hungry with food hanging, tempting him, tantalizing him. He was thirsty, but he couldn't bend down to drink from the water because the pond would shrink away whenever he bent over to drink from it. So that's the root of the word tantalize. Who asked that question? Oh,
You did.
I did. So that's Tantalus. Now we get to Pelops, and that is another interesting story, because he, like many other men, I think there were, I've forgotten how many, 18 or 20, young princes of the Peloponnese, and the Peloponnese is named for Pelops. The Greeks say Pelops and not Pelops. He fell in love with a young girl whose name was Hippodamia. Her father was a king who had the sadistic habit of inviting all of her suitors to participate in a chariot race. He had the fastest horses in the world, but he said that if the young man could beat him in a chariot race, he would be eligible to marry Hippodamia, with her consent, of course. So far, I think there were 18 heads on the gates of the city by the time that Pelops came along. But Pelops, with the aid of Hippodamia, who thought that despite his silver shoulder, he was a very good-looking young man, they concocted a scheme whereby the chariot driver, remember they were riding in chariots with two horses, the chariot driver was bribed to loosen the wheel of the chariot of Hippodamia's father, so that when they were going around the cliff, the wheel fell off, the father was killed, Hippodamia married Pelops, and they lived almost happily ever after. Ah, ha, 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 no. The driver's name is something that you don't need to remember, but it's kind of interesting because it is part of the curse, and it's not on your list. His name was Myrtilus, however the Greeks say it, I'm not really sure, but I like to say things in Italian, so I will. Myrtilus was bribed by being offered the first night with Hippodamia. That means he would get her virginity. And half the kingdom, by the way. You see what I think is important, that came last. So he somehow inveigled Myrtilus to go with him on a journey to survey the kingdom and decide which half he was going to have. And somehow along that journey, Myrtilus stopped. Hippodamia went into the bushes for the reason that people go into bushes. And he followed her and attempted to rape her. Pelops caught him and killed him. But as he died, he cursed his race forever. That's the next curse that was on the house of Atreus. Pelops and Hippodamia had children. They are listed here. You have Atreus, who married Europe. The others don't matter. Tyndareus was married to the mother of Helen of Troy, Leda, who gave birth to Helen because Zeus had a love member with Castor and Pollux, were the sons of Tyndareus, and he was the king of Mycenae. And the other brother that concerns us is Thyestes. Poor Niobe bragged that she had all these sons and they were more beautiful than the gods, and she was punished by seeing all her sons die. And that's why you see Niobe always weeping, because she sheds eternal tears for her children who were murdered because she bragged, which you never should do. You know, it's the old sin of hubris. If you brag and you think that you're better than the gods, you're in for a fall. So, the children, we know about Tyndareus. Thyestes, in turn, had two sons who perished when Atreus decided to follow the example of his. They were fighting over the kingdom, whether Thyestes or Atreus were going to be rulers of Mycenae, which at that time embraced most of the Peloponnese. And so Atreus invited Thyestes to dinner. He followed the same recipe of his grandfather, and when Thyestes had enjoyed a nice meal and, according to legend, let out the traditional burp of satisfaction, Atreus had brought in on a silver platter the heads and the hands and feet of his two sons, and he realized what he had eaten. I told you it was going to be a sickening class. I did warn you. Don't make faces. Okay. He ran from the hall, vomiting, of course, and as he ran, he in turn cursed the house of Atreus. So that is what they call the Thyestean feast. I don't know if you've heard that term. Not too often, I hope. And that is the curse that lay on the house of Atreus, or Atreus, if you want to say it in Greek. The story of Thyestes gets to be extremely interesting because of Aegisthus, whom we all think of in the story. Are you following this? Whom we all think of in the story of Electra. He is the one who murders Agamemnon. Where did Aegisthus come from? When Thyestes ran from this horrible occurrence, he went to the Oracle of Delphi to find out how he could get out from under the curse and what he could do to stop these things from happening. And the Oracle at Delphi told him that he must have a child with his daughter Pelopeia, and that child would kill Atreus. Pelopeia had been sent away from home and was serving as a priestess in the temple of Apollo, and Thyestes followed her footsteps, and when she went to bathe in the evening, he managed to capture her, blindfolded her so she didn't know who it was, and he raped her. She didn't know who it was, but she found his sword lying on the ground. He forgot his sword and kept it, and when she bore a child whom she named Aegisthus, she gave him the sword, which later he took to the court of Thyestes and realized who his father really was. Thyestes talked to him and explained all this to him. Aegisthus was very understanding, and he said, well, yes, if we really are going to get the kingdom, I will kill Atreus, and he did. He did kill Atreus, so that prophecy came true. However, Atreus and Europe had had children, and you see here Agamemnon was their child, and Agamemnon married his cousin. He wasn't in the competition for Helen, which may have galled both of them, but he married Clytemnestra. Now, if you think about it, Clytemnestra had a good reason to bear him a grudge, right? Already she had good reason to bear him a grudge. The other brother was Menelaus, or Menelaus, who married Helen of Troy, who encountered Paris, and you know the rest of that story because we've already told it. As we were going along, Gordon showed the archaeological ruins that you will see if you go to Mycenae, because you see there the beehive, which became known when they excavated it as the treasury of Atreus. These people were incredibly wealthy. They buried people with 44 pounds of gold in their graves. They found the grave sites. And you remember the jewels of Helen of Troy. You walk inside, and it's a room bigger than this, and twice as tall, in the shape of a beehive, and it has been constructed out of stone. Can you imagine the archaeologists going in and digging in and finding this enormous room, and there were graves on either side, which you can walk in and see the graves. Of course, they'd taken all the gold out, and that's where they found this mask, which Schliemann looked on and said, I have gazed on the face of Agamemnon. You remember that the head had actually, the flesh fell away when he took the mask off. But he made up that it was Agamemnon. It could have been anyone, but it could have been Agamemnon, because he did die there, didn't he? And when you go to the palace, you walk in past the lions were the symbol of Agamemnon, and that was one of his epithets, the lion, Agamemnon. And the lion gate up there, the lions have lost their heads, you can see, but I guess they had lions in Greece at that time. And this is the walkway as you go up into Mycenae, and you look down over this huge landscape. It's like being at a ski resort somewhere. When you're you've gone up on the lift and you look down, it's a tremendous landscape there with hills that rolling down to the sea, and you can see the Aegean Sea where Paris must have landed and climbed up to kidnap Helen. It's just a fantastic experience to actually go there. Okay, so Agamemnon married Clytemnestra, and they had children. The oldest daughter was Iphigenia, or Iphigenie, and Electra, which everyone says the same but spells sometimes with a K, and Electra we know about. Orestes was the little boy. After Paris kidnapped Helen, and Menelaus went to Agamemnon and said, you must support me in this, because we've all agreed that we will support anyone who is attacked, as I have been. And off they go. They all get all of the people of Mycenae, of Sparta. Menelaus was king of Sparta by then, of that whole portion of Greece. And they are from now on referred to as the Greeks, as opposed to the Trojans, who were in Troy, or Ilium, obviously. So he gets all the Greeks together, and they get all ready to sail, and they've got their 1,000 ships, each with 50 men. That's 50,000 men. That's quite a sizable army, right? And all the ships are ready to go, and they have their sails all set, and I don't know if any of you are sailors, but you know you do need a wind. Okay, and there's no wind. And the gods are upset. Why are they upset? Because this island was dedicated to the goddess Artemis, Diana, who was the goddess of the hunt. She has been offended because one of them killed a deer that was sacred to her, and it was her favorite deer, and they murdered the deer. So she demands to be placated. She has gone to Poseidon and demanded that the seas be becalmed, and there is no wind. They can't set sail. All the men are sitting around, and they can't set sail. He has Agamemnon is the leader now for his brother Menelaus, and he has a major problem. So what does he do? I'll tell you the story before you see this movie clip. This film is so moving that I really could barely look at it. For anyone who's a mother and I guess a father, the sacrifice that Artemis demands is his daughter, Iphigenia. It's the same thing. Remember in the Bible, the terrible story. It's one thing I cannot forgive in the Bible, where the child has to be killed by the father, and he has to face the fact that he has to sacrifice his daughter. Now, if I say to you he has to sacrifice his daughter so that the winds will blow and take him to Troy, and he does so, and off they go to Troy, that doesn't have much effect. But when you see it on screen, it was very difficult for me to watch. I've selected a couple of clips. Gordon's put them up there. What Agamemnon did was send for Iphigenia. How does he get his wife, Clytemnestra, to agree to send Iphigenia to an island where the men are gathering to make war? He says that he wants to marry her to the greatest warrior in the world, who is Achilles. So the mother thinks, oh, that's a good idea. and she brings her daughter to the island. And then she discovers that her husband, the father of her daughter, is going to sacrifice like a lamb. He takes her up the hill, just like Isaac in the Bible, and has to slit her throat. And this is the daughter that he has loved, and the mother has loved. So here are some film clips. This is a great film.
περάσω. Σηκώστε τον!
I think that gives you a tremendous feeling for what was happening on the island and with the men, and it gives you a sense of place, doesn't it? It's such a beautiful film, but it shows you how the men were rebelling against Agamemnon. They were saying, let's go, we want to go. Not because they wanted to save Helen, they wanted loot, they wanted to get the gold. They were hungry, they were on an island, they lived by raiding the flocks of the local shepherds. That's why they killed the deer of Artemis. So, what is Agamemnon to do? He knows what sacrifice is demanded of him.
Διάβασέ τον εσύ.
Στην Άρτεμη,
Δυνατά.
τη θεά Παρθένα, προστάτηδα του ιερού άλσους της Αυλίδας, που βεβήλωσαν οι Έλληνες με αίμα, ο βασιλιάς του Άργους,
Εσύ. Διάβαζε.
Ο βασιλιάς του Άργους Αγαμέμνων πρέπει να θυσιάσει την πρωτότοκη κόρη του, Ιφηγένεια. Αν δεχτεί, τα καράβια θα αρμενήσουν. Οι Έλληνες θα φανίσουν την Τρία. Αλλιώς δεν θα φύγουν ποτέ.
This is from a play by Euripides, by the way. It's taken from that. And they are saying that you expect us to sacrifice our lives in your war, and why will you not make a sacrifice as well of your daughter's life? So he sends for her, and Clytemnestra arrives, and I think the next is the scene with Clytemnestra.
Απάντησε.
Σταπάνθρωπη ερώτηση! Πώς να απαντήσω ανθρώπινα!
Ρώτησα και ρωτάω. Θα απαντήσεις. Η σιωπή σου φτάνει. Δεν χρειάζονται άλλα λόγια.
τον πόνο μου. Γιατί να τον εξευτελίσω με όλα ψέματα.
Εγώ όμως θα μιλήσω. Δίχως περιστροφές και υπενιγμούς. Εκεί που φτάσαμε, μιλάνε τα μαχαίρια. Με παντρεύτηκες. Πώς? Με ένα έγκλημα. Εσύ με ήθελες. Εγώ ποτέ. Σκότωσες τον άντρα μου, τον Τάνταλο, και μ' άρπαξες. Και όταν τα αδέρφια μου όρμησαν να σε εκδικηθούν, εσύ τι έκανες? Σούρθηκες στα πόδια του πατέρα μου. Κρεμάστηκες από ένα γέρο αδύναμο, ζητώντας έλεος. Και έλεος πήρες. Και κάτι παραπάνω. Εμένα, για γυναίκα σου. Τα χρόνια ξέφτισαν το μίσος μου. Έκανα την υποταγή μου δύναμη και στήλωσα το σπίτι σου πάνω στην αφοσίωσή μου. Δίπλα μου η δύναμή σου φούντωνε. Η φήμη σου, τα πλούτη σου, βουνό. Όλα σου τα έδωσα. Παιδιά, τούτο το γιο, πριν από αυτόν 3 κόρες. Σπλάχνα μου, όλα. Και τώρα, θέλεις να μου σκοτώσεις το όνομα? Και αν σε ρωτήσουνε γιατί, και θα ρωτήσουνε γιατί τη σκότωσες. Και θα απαντήσεις. Ευχαριστώ. Πως με το αίμα του παιδιού σου πληρώνεις λίτρα για μια πόρνη. Φιόρε, θα δίνεις ό,τι πιο πολύ αγαπάς για κάτι που απεχθάνεσαι. Και αν πας την τρία, με τι καρδιά θα σου κρατάω το σπίτι. Κάθε βήμα μου ακούω τα βήματά της και στις σκιές. Τα μάτια της θα καίνε σαν καντίνα. Μόνη, μέσα στα μαύρα, θα μετράω τις μαύρες ώρες με κατάρες μαύρες. Νύχτα μέρα θα φωνάζω. Ο άντρας μου είναι φωνιάς. Πατέρας και φωνιάς. Κάποτε ο πόλεμος θα τελειώσει. Αν ζήσεις, θα σε περιμένω. Μαζί με τα παιδιά μου. Το μίσος μας σαν την οχιά. Μια οχιά με 4 κεφάλια. Τόσο μονάχα. Τόσο θα χρειαστεί. Μια πρόφαση. Ένα τίποτα. Μην το κάνεις! Δεν θέλω μη με ρίξεις το κακό, είναι άδικο! Την ώρα εκείνη που το αίμα τρέχει στο βωμό, πού θα κοιτάς? Θα έχεις τα μάτια σου κλειστά και θα προσεύχεσαι. Τι προσευχές κάνουν οι παιδοκτόνοι. Ή μήπως θέλεις να προσευχηθώ εγώ για σένα? Αν υπάρχει Θεός, γιατί να τον χλεβάσω? Αυτά θα τα σκεφτείς καλά. Όλα. Ακόμα κι αν σε τύφλωσε η δόξα. Κι άλλο απ' τη δύναμη τίποτα δεν μετράει για σένα. Τώρα να τα αποδείξεις. Αρχηγός δεν είσαι? Έλληνες πες τους, στον πόλεμο έχουμε όλοι μερτικό. Να ρίξουμε λαχνό. Να αποφασίσει η τύχη ποιου από εμάς η κόρη θα πεθάνει. Αυτό θα ήταν το δίκιο. Αλλιώς, να θυσιάσει ο αδερφός σου, ο Μενέλαος, την κόρη που του γέννησε η Ελένη. Αυτή ξεκίνησε όλο το κακό. Γιατί εγώ να πληρώσω τη δική της ατιμία, γιατί να ρημάξω τη ζωή μου. Για να φτιάξω τη δική της. Τέλειωσε. Είναι δική σου κόρη, όσο και δική μου. Σπλαχνίσου την.
Κοντεύει η ώρα. Ο άλλος περιμένει έξω.
Θα ξαναφέρει στην Ιφηγένεια.
Iphigenia's realized what's going to happen. She's seen the lamb being taken to the top of the hill for the sacrifice, and then she realizes, she hears what, and she runs. She runs and hides at first. But then finally, at the end, she accepts her fate, and she goes to the top of the hill, Agamemnon is and the wind begins to blow.
Μ' αφήνεις! Μητέρα, θέλω να είμαι δυνατή. Βοήθαμε. Εμπρός, καλές μου φίλες. Πάμε. Φτάνουν τα δάκρυα. Αρχίστε το τραγούδι. Για να ξυπνήσουν οι άνεμοι. Να φουσκώσουν τα πανιά. Μη φεύγεις. Μην πας.
a tremendously powerful film, and I think just that image at the end gives you a lot more insight into the opera of Electra. But you certainly understand why she did what she did. Clytemnestra, I'm talking about. Some do say that there was a happier ending to the story, just to cheer you up. That Iphigenia, whatever, was spared at the last moment, that Artemis, like the Lord, did not demand the ultimate sacrifice, and they substituted a deer for the girl, and they spirited the girl away, and she went to Taurus, or Tauride in French, Tauride, and there she became a priestess in the temple. This legend has been the basis for many great works of art, paintings and operas. And there were 2 operas by Gluck, Christoph Willibald von Gluck, and one was Iphigenie on Aulide, which is this story, but then he took up the other story and wrote another opera called Iphigenie on Tauride, which is the story of her life after this scene that you just saw. Gluck, as you may remember, was a great innovator in opera, getting rid of all the baggage of the excess coloratura and the excess of everything that came in the Baroque times, and he wrote more of pure operatic things. He got rid of what he considered excess scenes. This Iphigenie on Tauride was an historic opera because it was the first opera that didn't speak of a romance between a man and a woman. And that's sort of interesting. It's a brother and sister because Orestes comes to Tauride and discovers her there, and the scenes that ensue would involve the killing, well, whatever. I'll tell you that story when we get to the clip. So off they went. They had a good fair wind for Troy, so to speak, and they landed on Troy. That isn't where the Iliad begins. The Iliad begins 9 years later. They have lived off the land in Troy. They periodically besiege the invincible walls of Troy, which some say were built by Pelops and some say were built by the Cyclops. They take loot where they can. You saw the scene last week of Achilles in the temple of Apollo, taking the gold statue of Apollo and offending Apollo. Now, Apollo is not a god you want to offend. He is the god of healing, but he was also the god of the plague. There are even those who call him Apollo Smaunis, I think it is, means the god of the mice, because rats carry the plague. And so they called him that. So he sends a plague because they have desecrated his temple, and he falls into a rage. And when the Iliad begins, it is the end of the 9th year, beginning of the 10th year of the siege of Troy, and the men are lie dying on the sands, and there's nothing to sustain them anymore. They've been there for a long time. They basically want to go home. But Agamemnon has decided to conquer Troy, and so they must conquer Troy. I'm going to read you the scene he has taken, as part of his loot from the temple, the priestess of the temple, who was the daughter of the priest Chrysis. The girl's name is Chryseis. He is very fond of Chryseis, and he speaks evil of his wife Clytemnestra in this speech. The priest comes and he demands the return of his daughter. He says the only way to get Apollo to take away the plague is by giving back Chryseis, the daughter. Wide-ruling Agamemnon, widely distressed, his darkening heart consumed with rage, his eyes like gleaming fires, glaring, he first addressed Calchas, the prophet, the seer. Prophet of evil, never yet have you spoken anything good for me. Always to prophesy evil is dear to your heart. You have never spoken nor yet accomplished any good word. And now you speak, declaiming God's will, that for this reason you say the archer who shoots from afar, which is Apollo, causes their affliction, because I was not willing to accept his splendid ransom for the girl Chryseis, since I greatly desire to have her at home, for I prefer her to Clytemnestra, my wedded wife, as she is not inferior to her, not in figure or bearing, nor even in disposition or handiwork. because in those days they prized very greatly, as we've spoken, the handiwork of women, the weaving and the embroidery and the needlework of women. Yet even so, I will give her back, but make ready another prize, so that I alone am not unrecompensed. It is not fitting. And Achilles answered him, most honored son of Atreus, of all men most covetous of possessions, how then can the great-hearted Achaeans give you a prize? We do not know of any great common store laid up anywhere, but those things we carried from the cities, these have been distributed. It's not fitting to go about gathering these things again from the men. Relinquish the girl. We Achaeans will pay you back 3 times over if ever Zeus gives us the well-walled city of Troy to plunder. This is offensive to Agamemnon. He refuses to give up Chryseis of the lovely cheeks, but then he says, okay, if I have to give her up, I'll take someone else's prize instead. And the son of Peleus, who is Achilles, after Chryseis was gone, he again addressed Agamemnon, and he did not hold back his anger. Wine besotted, you who have the eyes of a dog and the heart of a deer, never do you have courage to gear up for battle with your people, not to go on ambush with the best of the Achaeans. To you that is as death. Far better that all through the broad army of the Achaeans you seize the gifts of the man who speaks against you, which is Achilles. And he takes the girl Briseis from Achilles. You will rip the heart within you raging that you paid no honor to the best of the Achaeans. The best of the Achaeans, of course, is Achilles. It's not Agamemnon. But Agamemnon was born to be king. He has the scepter. In those days, the scepter was the sign of power. And so Achilles loses Briseis. Then he says that he will not give in because he will not go out and fight. And that is the basis of the Iliad, that Achilles really refuses to fight, and they can't win without him. He is it's one-to-one combat in those days, you know. They talk about it very, very vividly. Achilles says, may I be called a coward and of no account if I submit to you in everything you should say. Give such orders to other men, but do not act as master to me, for I do not think it likely I will obey you. And I will tell you something else, and put it away in your mind. I will not fight for the girl with strength of hand, nor with you or any other man. But of other possessions, of these you can take nothing lifted against my will, and I invite you to try. So these men too will know. Very quickly will your dark blood gush around my spear. Having fought like this with words, blow for blow, they both stood up and broke up the assembly by the ships of the Achaeans. They gave up Chryseis of the lovely cheeks. So sweet. And they found Achilles by his shelter and dark ship, sitting, and he did not rejoice to see him. And he refuses to go, and then he has to give up Briseis. It's a long, long scene there. But he is in agony himself, Achilles, not only because he had to give up this girl who was his favorite bed companion, but although Patroclus also slept in the next bed with his bed companion, and the girl unwillingly went with them. She went unwillingly. She had fallen in love with Achilles, as is shown in this film. But Achilles prays to his mother, if you remember, was Thetis, the sea nymph, the sea goddess, and he says, Mother, that the gods have promised me great glory but a short life. And he's mulling over in his mind, is it better to have glory and to be short-lived, or was it be better to go back to your home and have your wife and your children and live a long life and live in peace and not have glory? And I think that that's a question that faces people even today. Nothing has changed. So here is the scene from the film.
You have won a great victory, my King of Kings. No one thought the Trojan beach could be captured so easily.
A beautiful gift, Triopas. You will be among the first to walk in the streets of Troy tomorrow.
My father, Neleus, had this urn made to commemorate his victory at Cyparicius. I present it to you, in honor of an even more memorable victory.
Thank you, old friend. Tomorrow, we'll eat supper in the gardens of Troy. Leave us.
War is young men dying and old men talking. You know this. Ignore the politics.
Apparently you won some great victory.
Perhaps you didn't notice. The Trojan beach belonged to Priam in the morning. It belongs to Agamemnon in the afternoon.
Can I have the beach? I didn't come here for sand.
No. You came here because you want your name to last through the ages. A great victory was won today, but that victory is not yours. Kings did not kneel to Achilles. Kings did not pay homage to Achilles.
Perhaps the kings were too far behind to see. The soldiers won the battle.
History remembers kings, not soldiers. Tomorrow we'll batter down the gates of Troy. I'll build monuments to victory on every island of Greece. I'll carve Agamemnon in the stone.
Be careful, King of Kings. First, you need the victory.
Your men sacked the Temple of Apollo, yes?
You want gold? Take it. It's my gift to honor your courage. Take what you wish.
I already have. Afarius! Hemon! The spoils of war.
No argument with you, brothers, but if you don't release her, you'll never see home again. Decide.
Guards!
Stop! Too many men have died today. If killing is your only talent, that's your curse. I don't want anyone dying for me.
Mighty Achilles, silenced by a slave girl. Tonight, I'll have her give me a bath. And then, who knows?
You sack of wine! Before my time is done, I will look down on your corpse and smile.
I think Brad Pitt does a great job. I believe him, don't you? The counterpart of Achilles, the man who represents home and defending his home, which is Troy, is Hector. And Hector is as great a hero as Achilles. The gods were against him, though. The stories from the Iliad have, behind the Iliad really, have been the stuff of stories ever since 700 years before Christ. We're still writing stories that are based on these situations, you know, this kind of drama. So it's important that you know them and we know where they came from and so forth. That's why I put you through that today.